Connectra creates opportunities for people living with disabilities by providing information, resources, and programming geared towards greater inclusion and quality of life. Check out some of the programs we offer through our online learning platform, Connect Together, including our Service Mondays, where we highlight a local organization or initiative, Wednesday Chair Yoga with Bobby Seal-Kobiski, Thursday Adapted Fitness with Megan Williamson, Friday Rotating Dance Classes hosted by Janice Lawrence and Joann Cuff, and other initiatives including presentations by the Disabled Independent Gardeners Association's Growable program and our Perspective series. Check out our updated programs calendar on our website, connectra.org, or find us on Facebook at Connectra Society.
You can start.
Okay, I'll share my screen. Is that good?
Yeah, Callie. Yeah.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about disability justice. So this topic was given to us as something that people wanted to hear more about. So we're excited to be here. And we'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. I realize that some of you could be coming from other lands and that maybe even from across so-called Canada. And so please, if you want to share, put in the chat the land that you're sitting on right now if you'd like to recognize it. Today, I am on the traditional, ancestral, and stolen territories of the Musqueam people. And I acknowledge their enduring presence and the deep traditional knowledges of Indigenous people who have lived here forever. And Indigenous identities and experiences are rich and multifaceted, and they're interwoven and intersectional. And that's significant to teachers like myself and Joann in classrooms. And so as educators, we should recognize our crucial role in promoting disability justice. But if you're not an educator, it still is something that I hope you'll leave today feeling like you could promote in other parts of your life, and acknowledging the intersectionality of students' identities and understanding their unique experiences. And fighting ableism, discrimination towards people with disabilities or disabled people, is intertwined with combating all forms of discrimination, be it racism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, classism, heteronormativity, etc. And so we understand that social justice for all groups of people must include disabled people. So in our efforts to create a more just society, teachers should strive to uplift every community and understand the diverse experiences and identities that lie within.
And so as educators, we recognize we have diverse students in our classrooms. And in Canada, we have Indigenous students who have been armed by educational systems and specifically teachers who have perpetuated stereotypes and limited identities. So as educators and for all of us on this call, we should remain vigilant to ensure that our educational practices do not reinforce these harmful narratives. And so it's important as educators for us to have an enduring commitment to better understand and engage with intersectional identities, advocating for the rights and voices of all our students, and fostering a learning environment that truly values and respects diversity and inclusion. And so I would like to, for everyone on the call, and because we're talking about disability justice, my name is Dr. Joann Anokwuru. I am Black, from African descent, and I'll describe myself because I'm sure there could be some people on this call who are visually impaired as well. So I'm wearing glasses, I'm Black, I have very long hair with two-tone, and I work with people with disability, and I also have experienced what it is to be disabled. At the age of 18, I was medically paralyzed for over 2 years. And so I truly understand this disability justice and the meaning behind it. I'm wearing a purple t-shirt and I'm sitting on a chair speaking from Vancouver in a classroom office.
So I am Dr. Carly Christensen, and I'm a white woman. I have kind of past my shoulders. I have mid-length brown hair that's quite curly, and I identify as disabled. I wear 2 medical devices. They're not totally visible right now on the Zoom screen, but they could beep throughout this presentation and sound sort of like a cell phone or a text message, but it's actually my insulin pump. And my insulin pump is on my waistband and my sensor is wore on my waist. And so you can't see it under my clothes. I work with training teachers at University of British Columbia, so here at UBC in Vancouver. And my focus is training them to work with students who have disabilities and inclusive settings. And I used to be a teacher, and I'm coming from my home office in Vancouver. Okay, so a little bit before we dive into this topic. So today we're going to be discussing some of the key struggles and victories in the disability rights and justice movement. So in overviewing some of these victories and struggles, there are people, moments, events that could be potentially distressing for some of us. And these things include institutionalization, forced sterilization, death and dying, ableism alongside other types of discrimination, including racism, eugenics with detailed mentions of the Nazi regime, and then Indian residential schooling in so-called Canada, abuse, which includes both emotional, sexual, and physical abuse, and medical experimentation, and racism too. So while we're going through this today, I want you to center your own well-being and know that at any point, if it's becoming too much or you don't want to be participating anymore, please center that. It will be available on YouTube. You can watch it later if that's something that you would like to come back to, but don't feel pressured to stay on if it becomes overwhelming or too much.
And so just as Dr. Kali has mentioned, this is the outline for the entire presentation today. What were you taught about disability in school and media? We'll also be sharing an inspiration poem. So as we talk, just keep thinking about what did you learn about disability while you were in school or from social media. We'll also be touching on some disability rights movements, a few key moments, ongoing work to be done and which is yet to be done. And we'll dig deeper into what is disability justice. We'll review the principles, and as educators, why apply a disability justice framework in education? Because that's where we're coming from, the space of education.
And so just another thing we want to clarify as we go throughout this presentation, part of disability justice is affirming self-identification, just like with preferred pronouns, also saying to people who have a disability or are disabled, how do you prefer to be referred to? So I use identity first language. So identify as disabled, not a person with a disability, because I see this as a central part of my identity and who I am. And that's the language I prefer. So throughout the presentation, we'll use both, depending on the person that we're talking about, the language they used. So we're honoring their self-identification also. Okay, so what were you taught about disability in school? And now, if you're no longer in school, what were you taught about disability in the media we consume? So it's often the topic of disability or people with disabilities are often left out of the formal curriculum of schools. And it's kind of troublesome and really upsetting to me because people that have disabilities have been part of all these social justice movements, and they have been active parts of the civil rights movement, for example, and feminism. And yet, when we teach them in our schools, and often the depictions of these key historical moments will leave in like media and movies will leave out these incredible disabled activists. And so on this slide, there is a picture that has a group. This is in the United States, a group of very famous disabled activists. Many of them are in wheelchairs in the front line, and they're holding up a banner that says, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And this is a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. And then when we do get disability representation in school and in media, often it is focused on a few very famous people. And usually those famous people come from one group of or category of disabled people. So people with physical disabilities. And this is problematic in many ways. We could literally do an entire presentation just about this, but we're going to move on for a second.
So, I mean, for those of us on the call, if I were to ask you to put on the chat, how many of these people with disability can you recognize? You know, what do you know these people and what do you know them for? I'll give you 1 second to see if you can type on the chat, or just 1 minute. How many of these people you know? And what do you know them for? If you're able to put in the chat. Their names. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
So we have in the chat Beethoven, Stevie Wonder, and Stephen Hawking.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Stephen Hawking, yes.
And so often when we teach about these people in a school setting, or when we watch films about these people's lives depicted, hopefully being a disabled person or a person with a disability is part of that story. Sometimes, though, it's left out. And so when we talk about Beethoven, do my students, do they actually know that Beethoven was deaf? And often the answer to that is no. And so, yes, Beethoven is the person on the right.
On the right, yes.
Yeah. And then we have a few more.
Yes.
So if you recognize these people, put them in the chat. Both of these people are women. And so there sometimes is a representation issue with more men being seen than women. So yes, Helen Keller and Frida Kahlo, a famous painter. And often when we hear the story of these two women, Helen Keller, we hear about disability, but not as much with Frida. And this, I don't know, it could be part of some of the erasure of that part of her identity. So she is a polio survivor who also had a terrible accident in her life that caused permanent damage to her spine. And a lot of her paintings actually involve themes around disability, but that's often left out even at exhibits, right, that I've seen. And then to take it closer to home.
Yeah.
Does anyone recognize these two individuals? Yes, Terry Fox and Rick Hansen.
Yes.
So they're often talked about in elementary and high schools. However, it's not necessarily taught from the lens of being a disability rights advocate. Students may not even make that connection. And so how can we be, and me and Joann wonder this a lot, how can we be training teachers so that when they do have some representation in their classroom, that they are talking about this significant part of these people's multi-dimensional identities? Okay, so there's many barriers and issues we could talk about around disability representation, but this is one we're just going to touch on briefly. And the thing is it's been coined by Stella Young, the late Stella Young, and she called this inspiration porn. So when we see images or we have depictions of disabled people, it's used often to inspire non-disabled or temporarily able-bodied people. And so what she says here, and I use the term porn deliberately because they objectify one group of people for the benefit of another group of people. And then she goes on in her amazing TED Talk, which we'll put the link in the chat later. It's 15 minutes long and it's fantastic. And she says this quote, which is depicted on the poster, "The only disability in life is a bad attitude." She says, "This is absurd. No amount of smiling or fighting smiling at a flight of stairs has ever made it turn into a ramp. No amount of standing in the middle of a bookshelf and radiating a positive attitude is going to turn all those books into Braille." So her point with the inspiration porn being an issue is that it often doesn't engage with the ongoing injustices and barriers that disabled people face. And so it's often people talking for people with disabilities instead of disabled people speaking themselves too. So we want to avoid that in any representation of those people we just showed you, realizing that that isn't enough disability representation. We should have more, and it should be more holistic. Okay. So we're going to now talk about some key moments in the disability rights movement in so-called Canada. And we'll also put this link in the chat too. And it is a disability justice and rights timeline that is centered in the Turtle Island kind of context, mainly so-called Canada. And it's not an exhaustive list. It is an ongoing project that myself and some graduate students at UBC have been working on. So we keep adding to it. So don't be surprised if you look at it now and then in a few months it has like 50 more entries, hopefully. So we keep adding people and events to it. And so we're going to show you a few highlights of this from this timeline. Now, it's not an exhaustive list. We can't go through all the incredible work that has been done by the disabled community in this incredible movement, but we're going to show you a few of the events.
So one of the first key moments in the movements in disability is the institutionalization of people with disabilities in BC, meaning the state of being kept in a residential home in an institution. And for people with disabilities in BC, and a provincial asylum for them was insane, and later known as the Woodland School here, which opened in New Westminster on May 17, 1878. And you can imagine that it stayed from 1878 all the way to 1996 when it was finally closed down, marking the culmination of a long struggle to end large institutions in BC. Following the closure of this residential school or this institution for people with disabilities, to allegations by former residents who were kept there due to abuse at Woodlands, the province and the BC provincial government asked for an independent review. Next slide.
There's just a comment in the chat that the closed caption.
They said the closed caption disappeared.
So I'm hoping that our tech person can fix that for us. I guess we have to keep talking so that
Caption is still on.
Okay.
You might need to click it in your screen for the caption.
Oh, she's saying it works now. Okay. So
Okay.
we're good.
Okay.
Joanne, I switched the slide for you.
Okay, then that's fine. Thank you. And so the Woodland Memorial Garden in 1996 became the first province in Canada to close all its large institutions for people with intellectual disabilities. Today, people who were once segregated and put in these institutions from society are meeting new neighbors, co-workers, soulmates. They're part of our community and friends and participating as citizens in the communities. I'm sure for so many of us, we've heard what is called the community living. In BC, it's called Community Living BC, CLBC. Still, provinces in so-called Canada where people with disabilities, there's still some provinces that people with disabilities are still institutionalized still today. And so with this conversation on disability justice, what can be done by these provinces to stop this institutionalization and get people to interact and become more into the society and engage with community living.
And so the institutionalization of people with disabilities was largely informed by this movement called eugenics. And at the time, eugenics became popular in the late 19th century into the early 20th century. And it was seen as a scientific movement. And now we wouldn't call it that. We'd call it racism and ableism and violence. But at the time, it was referred to as a scientific movement. And it informed a lot of social, cultural, and racial stratifications in society, and it led to direct policies like the forced institutionalization that Joann just talked about. And eugenics societies, this is a picture of a eugenics society. So it's a black and white photo, and there's men and women gathered outside of this building, and it actually has the title on the building, Eugenics Building. So these societies sprung up across North America, but also in Europe. And they were advocating for things like mass institutionalization, imprisonment, and forced sterilization. And this notion of like racial hygiene being really significant. But this also affected in the intersection people with disabilities. And it led to one of the darkest moments in history, in my opinion. And so this is in Germany under the Nazi regime. There was the T4 program. And the T4 program was initiated in 1939, and it officially discontinued in 1941. However, there are documents and historians that seem to believe that it continued kind of under the radar covertly throughout many more years until 1945. And so the T4 program, it mobilized doctors and the psychiatric community and nurses, and it was established to kill people whose lives were deemed unworthy. So this is based on eugenics science, as we'll put in fake quotations here, beliefs. And many historians believe that this organized genocide of people with disabilities, often children, was a precursor to the Holocaust, and many of the methods that were then used more widely by the Nazi regime in the Holocaust were tested first in the T4 program. And the numbers are very widely disputed about how many people were killed in the T4 program. And this is in part due to documents being destroyed, but also when did it really end? Because there was an official end and then it continued. So anyway, one of the numbers that's batted around a lot is the 200,000, but remember, it could be a lot more. And the photo is of a group of young children that were taken to a concentration camp in 1934. One of the children in the forefront of the photo has Down syndrome.
So from the eugenics movement, where people were either, killed or taken away, or the genocide, then came the Sexual Sterilization Act. This could have come up from, instead of us killing people, we could just sterilize them so that they don't reproduce more of their kind. And so about 200 to 400 British Columbians were sterilized. And I'm sure some of us, if you have read Andrew Solomon's book, Far From a Tree, there's a particular chapter in that book that really touches about this Sterilization Act and how people with disabilities were constantly taken to places to be sterilized so they don't produce their same kind. And then there was a broad support for the act in BC, British Columbia, including political support from the Liberal Party of British Columbia. A few hundred people were sterilized in BC. Again, just like the records from the Hitler T4 action, records were destroyed. The exact number is unknown, but is estimated to be between 200 and 400. BC's Sexual Sterilization Act was repealed in 1973.
And so there were two provinces. Alberta also had a sexual sterilization act. And it's seen as widely connected to the eugenics movements.
And so in 1982, there's the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms was enacted, which forms the fourth part of the Constitution Act. And as part of the Constitution, the Charter is the highest law of the land, whereby it declares physical or mental disability as a prohibited reason for discrimination. This was the first time that such a right was guaranteed in the Constitution of a country where people with disabilities had the right to freedom, they had the right to employment, they had the right to everything that everyone else has. And then the original draft of the charter did not include disability as protected under Section 15.
So it was a huge win
Yeah.
for the disability rights movement that it got in there.
Yeah.
And so this is something that is an ongoing. So that's why the date, it says 2007 and ongoing. So Jordan River Anderson was a young man who is First Nations. He was born in a hospital in Winnipeg. He came from a northern community, a Cree community. And so he was born with complex medical needs and disabilities. And this led to him spending 2 years in the hospital with a lot of additional therapy, but he was cleared to leave the hospital. However, he would need a medical foster home, and they really wanted him to get to live life outside of a hospital. However, there was a jurisdictional dispute, and it was over the bill, all the medical and related therapy bills, who was going to pay them. So Jordan River Anderson, like I said, is a First Nations child who lived in a First Nations community. And so the federal government and the provincial government were in a dispute over who should pay the bill. And the cost of his care made it. And so Jordan River Anderson, he actually lived more than 2 years in the hospital and died in 2005, still in the hospital, having never spent a day living in a home of his own. And so in memory of him, a group of incredible activists, including disabled activists, but also Indigenous activists, proposed this legal mandate called Jordan's Principle. It is the law now, and it's a child first principle. So it says that we will provide the services for First Nations children and at the same terms as non-First Nations children, and whatever organization comes in contact with them first, that's who covers it, and we deal with the bill later. So it doesn't hold up care and services. And now Jordan's Principle, it funds special education across First Nations self-governing schools in all of so-called Canada. It provides early childcare services, recreation and leisure activities for people with complex medical needs and disabilities. It also has funding directed towards their cultural and linguistic rights too. And so this is a sweeping piece of legislation and funding. However, why it's ongoing is that there have been repeated Canadian Human Rights Tribunals complaints about how Jordan's Principle has been implemented improperly, not enough, not to enough children, applications getting denied for things that people need to live and have access to schools, community, and health and well-being. And so it's ongoing. There are continued human rights complaints.
So in 2018, the ACA, the Accessibility Canada Act, was enacted as well. And the vision behind this act is proactively eliminate and prevent barriers and ensure greater opportunities for persons with disability. And so the overarching goal of the ACA is to realize a barrier-free Canada by 2040. And the legislation benefits all Canadians, especially people with disabilities, with the removal and prevention of barriers to accessibility in 7 priority areas: going back again to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom. And so what are the 7 priority areas? Employment, which is key, because by the time you're done with school, everyone wants to get a job or wants to have a source of income. The built environment around us, look around us daily. How much of the resources around us, how many buildings, how many facilities around us can become a barrier to people with disabilities? Just even going through a door, what kind of knobs do we have at the door that can allow people pass through the door without, especially people who have disability that has to do with their fine motor grip or movements with their hands. Information and communication technologies, communication other than ICT, having the ACT, the design and delivery of programs and services, the procurement of goods, services and facilities, and transportation. And so when we think about the Accessibility Canada Act, it involved significant consultation with stakeholders and the disability community in particular. So one of the key principles of the ACA is there's nothing without us, which means that people with disabilities should be consulted regularly. Where are their voices when developing laws, policies, and programs that impact them? So nothing without us, meaning where are voices in all of these spaces? Where are voices when any act is being propagated?
So there's also some provinces who have enacted a provincial version of this federal law, like BC too has done that. So this is just one example of the intersection of extreme racism and colonialism with disabled people in the movement for greater rights. So there could be many that we could put up for this, but this is the one we're going to go with today. So Grassy Narrows is a First Nations community found in Treaty 3, so northwestern Ontario. And there was a die-in, is what they called it, which is a play on the term sit-in from the civil rights movement. So it's a protest. And they sat outside of a federal building in Toronto, protesting the lack of financial support and ongoing compensation for the devastating impacts of mercury poisoning. And so mercury poisoning can cause all sorts of health and disability related issues. For example, things like numbness in your hands, muscle weakness, hearing loss, visual impairments, speech impediments, tremors, seizures, complete loss of vision, tunnel vision, etc. There's wide ranges. And many First Nations communities contend with ongoing pollution like mercury poisoning, resulting in huge amounts of disability and medical need. And so the continued exposure to mercury can lead to permanent brain damage. It can cause birth defects in unborn children, kidney damage, and even death. So in 2019, a report came out that showed that nearly 90% of the people who live in this First Nations community, Grassy Narrows, suffer from symptoms related to mercury poisoning. And so this sit-in, die-in, is trying to say our community members are dying and living with a lot of disabilities that are caused because of this ongoing inadequate funding and inadequate ways of dealing with the cleanup of the severe environmental pollution.
Yeah. So fight for marriage equality, it's an ongoing issue. Disabled people who rely on government for assistance, financial assistance, health support assistance, risk of reduction or loss for individuals cohabiting for over a year or getting married. So the minute they get married, which is one of the things we need, which is a priority for some people, instantly they lose every financial or health support assistance from the government. So support is meant to actually cover additional costs of living with disability. And then there's the need for the marriage equality issue for disability community. This is longstanding, and no matter everything we talk about is tied back to the history of eugenics, involving forced sterilization and marriage prohibition for disabled people. Because once there's the sterilization or the eugenics, then there's no possibility for people with disability to, have families or desire to get married. And so this is an ongoing issue from fight for marriage equality. It's ongoing, and it's the desire for support, financial support, health support, and every form of additional cost. So living with disability should not be a prevention for achieving this marriage cost or having this marriage equality.
So that's not all the key moments of the disability rights movement. We could literally do a whole class on that, but those were some key ones we wanted to pull out. And I really love this quote. So it says, revolutions began when people who were defined as problems achieved the power to redefine the problem. And the image here that is on the slide is of a Black person in a wheelchair, and there's a flight of stairs in front of him. And to me, this image illustrates a lot of what we've been showing you. The problem isn't that this person moves in a wheelchair. The problem is that there's a flight of stairs and it looks like no other way to get to wherever he's trying to go. And so the problem is not him existing in a wheelchair. The problem is the stairs, and that problem is not his fault. So how could this link to the disability rights movement? So that, to me, this image is showing us that link. And that leads us to disability justice. So why aren't we just saying we're talking about disability rights? Like, why was this presentation called disability justice? And it's actually because we need to go further than disability rights. We need to do disability justice. And so in 2005, a group of queer disabled women of color in so-called United States coined the term disability justice. And they were critiquing that a lot of the disability rights movement, it actually didn't look at intersectional identities, and that people, the voices of often white disabled people, were centered at the expense of the experiences of people of color or people who were queer that also had disabilities. And so they wanted to put forth, what would this look like? We talk about climate justice, we talk about social justice. What is disability justice? And at the very center of it is that the framework recognizes that disabled people were all things. We can also be people of color, indigenous people and communities. We can be immigrants and refugees. We can be part of the LGBT two-spirited plus group. We could also be unhoused and have a disability, or incarcerated, and all others. And that not recognizing that intersection holds the whole movement back. And they would say that things like the grassy narrows, mercury poisoning, and Jordan's principle not being fulfilled is because we need to look at it through a disability justice lens and look at racism and ableism as interconnected. So this is the group that those women, those queer women of color that were disabled, that coined disability justice, came up with was disability justice, and they had 10 principles. And their group is called Sins Invalid. They are still very active and do all sorts of incredible things. And this is like the 10 rallying points. So we're going to go through them quite briefly and describe each of these points, and then give you an example from school, because Joann and I, that's what we know. We're educators. But there could be examples, and there are examples in any area of your life. These principles could exist. And so we want the next movement to be a disability justice movement.
So we will start from intersectionality, which was a term coined by the legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. So this term illustrates how factors like race and gender often intersect, creating unique experiences of discrimination. How is it that a race and gender, will and disability, those are spaces where discrimination occurs. And acknowledging that disabled individuals definitely experiences are influenced by factors like race, class, sexuality, age, and immigration status, just like the three women we just spoke about, Mia Mingos and Patty Burney. And some of these things also highlight how harmful ideologies such as ableism, racism, sexism, xenophobia, homophobia, and transphobia can interlock and mutually reinforce each other across all spaces. And as educators, Carly, do you want to look at the implications for intersectionality with education?
Yeah, there's so many ways that this should impact how we teach and plan for students with disabilities in schools. So, for example, that we shouldn't see a child with a disability as having one identity. They have a disability. They also could have needs related to their language or their cultural needs that should be part of their school planning and seen as another part of their identity. They're not just a person with a disability. They also may have a sexual orientation and gender that should be considered in all of the ways we accommodate or meet their needs in schools. So then the next principle is leadership. So the disability rights movement has been criticized, like I mentioned previous, that it centered white disabled people and often didn't necessarily give enough attention to racism and other forms of oppression within our own disability rights movement. And so when we look at the leadership in disability rights and justice groups, it needs to also be on purpose considering who isn't represented and giving leadership roles to people who experience complex intersections of ableism. And so, Joann, do you want to talk about the school implications?
So, when we look at leadership in the school system, that's when school leaders coming from the school district to the government, engaging and actively working towards dismantling, systemic barriers and creating a more inclusive environment, not just for the children, but for also the parents and for people with disabilities within the school system, inviting everyone, the students, their families, to bring their voices forward in making sure that they have a space in our schools, and special education planning must then authentically collaborate or ensure that there's collaboration amongst everyone, because sometimes what we have is the top-down approach and removing people with disabilities and bringing their voices forward. And that's where leadership plays a role by offering opportunities to everyone, people with disabilities, their families, and educators as well. Yeah.
Okay, this one I'm really passionate about.
Yeah.
But Joanne's going to take it away first.
Okay, so looking at the anti-capitalist politics, emphasizes that a person's value is not contingent on their level of productivity, and therefore resisting the pressure of high productivity expectations in a capitalistic society in which most of us, we all live in. And this brings attention to the systemic poverty often imposed on people with disabilities because there's that barrier. They are unable to work or they are unable to be employed, and asserts that every individual is entitled to have their need met, irrespective of their ability to contribute productively. And so yeah.
In schools, this has huge impacts.
Exactly.
And so the image on this slide is of a report card with an A+ on it. And you might be like, why did they put this on the slide? Well, to me, this speaks to, in schools, a student's worth is often demonstrated through grades. And those grades are representative of money, like how productive they are gives them capital, gives them privileges in school. And there's a hierarchy that's often determined by grades, which are markers of educational productivity, just like a wage, how much money you make in a capitalist society becomes often seen as a marker of success that we need to kick back on. And so how could education be reframed? And so grades weren't this capitalistic thing. Well, there's so many implications. And education shouldn't just be, and it should be about learning, not amassing grades. And it should also look beyond what does a grade mean? What does a successful student look like? How do we value whatever people bring to our room, just like we would do in larger society? And that we're not just preparing students to enter a workforce to make money, we're preparing them to be global citizens in a society.
And so looking at the cross-movement solidarity, yeah?
Okay, so with this one, it's showing that all of the social justice movements are interconnected. And as we get greater liberation in one movement, we get greater liberation for all. So things like inclusive education, racial justice, environmental justice, campaigns against police brutality, that actually impacts the disabled community positively too. And so recognizing that people with disabilities, that they're in all of these groups, and promoting the solidarity and the ways that activism against like police brutality or environmental justice or LGBT plus two-spirited groups, that's us too. That's the disabled community. And bridging those gaps will bring greater liberation for all.
Yeah. And there's no social justice movement in education if everyone, including people with disabilities, are not involved. You know, we can't say we're doing a cross-movement solidarity if everyone, this is literally everyone, just as Kali has mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I love the image. It has people with different skin
Yeah.
and race represented, in their fists are up in the air. So all the movements support each other.
Mhm.
And then we have wholeness and value.
Yeah. You know, it asserts, the disability justice movement asserts that individuals with disabilities are whole and complete. You know, we have this constant conversations around, hey, that's not a, I mean, when I hear that word, oh, that's an abnormal person, or people tend to use very derogatory words. I love this. One of the principles which of disability justice, which looks at wholeness and value. Every one of us brings big value to the table, to the society. And so people with disabilities are not to be defined by or diminished due to their disabilities. And disability individuals have enriching inner lives and invaluable experiences that contribute to societal diversity. And because they are whole and complete, definitely there's an educational implication for that. They're part of our school society.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that Joann pointed out that people with disabilities bring diversity and richness to the community. And so in schools, often kids with disabilities are seen as a burden or a challenge or a problem that has to be fixed, instead of seeing them as part of a valued identity group that brings richness to the classroom. So recognizing that their perspectives and being a disabled student actually builds our whole group. That would be a major shift in education, and seeing them as whole, not as something that needs to be fixed. And then there's sustainability. Now, in every movement for social justice, this is a problem because there's so many battles we're still fighting. Like, we've made progress, but there's still ongoing issues. And so the disabled activists that lead movements, having a disability and being a leader can be complicated based on your needs and burnout. And so we need to make sure that the movement is aware of the people that are leading it and supporting each other. And there's educational implications, obviously.
Yeah. And definitely the sustainability of inclusive education practices requires a collective effort. Looking at the diagram, it's not just one person. Requires, like we looked at the leadership, school leadership, it includes the parents, includes students, everyone, the entire school community, the support staff, everyone has to come together to allow for inclusive education to be sustainable. And it's not just for the moment. It's for as long as we have people with disabilities in our school system, and to avoid that burnout, everyone needs to be included and everyone's voice needs to be at that table, providing the school a safe environment for everyone, even the community, a safe space for everyone to be fully included and every voice to be heard.
And I love what Joann just said, because many people with disabilities in schools have to fight for access and rights. And if you're going to promote sustainability, that means accepting and schools planning and doing the work to make it so that student can be part. Commitment to cross-disability solidarity. So what this is talking about is that disability is not a monolithic singular identity. There are so many different types of disabilities with unique and diverse experiences within the community, and realizing that maybe some of the battles for the chronically ill are different than people that have an intellectual disability, but that we can build each other up, that we're not fighting against each other, that we are also recognizing that there's unique, different needs that each group has and different struggles that they're fighting. And so this has major implications in education.
And so, we need to, while we're focusing on students with disabilities, we should think about other students without IEP, some students without mental health conditions. So many students are undiagnosed in our schools. And so all of this ableism tends to affect students with diverse needs. And there's the need for us to, as Kalia said, we need to focus on all individual students, all disabled students, especially those who don't even have any form of diagnosis. We have the ones who we can see, the range of disabilities. What about those who are medically ill? We don't see the equipment on their body, we just see them, but then they struggle within the school system. So that's where ableism needs to be dismantled within the school system and commit to cross-disability solidarity. There's nothing about us without us. And so we go on to,
So the 8th principle is interdependence. So interdependence is about really recognizing the pursuit of liberation for all oppressed groups, and that, like we've said before, as you push one movement forward, you're pushing all the social justice movements forward, and that we can lean into each other for support. And we need to prioritize the groups that have been left out. But to me, interdependence is even deeper. It's also saying it's okay to ask others for support. That this idea that everyone needs to be independent to be valued is capitalistic, back to that 4th principle. And so every community exists by us building each other up. So not seeing disabled people as burdens in a community, but rather seeing them as a vibrant and a crucial part of the community. And they come with gifts and they bring things, and that should be part of how we support everyone.
And I think that speaks to the entire school community as well as education, because that's the collaboration we've been talking about, and the emphasis on everyone needs to be recognized within the same space, offering a safe and loving environment for students with disabilities within the school and the community. Yeah.
And then we have collective access. So we have the Accessible Canada Act over here as one of the images. And this one is so important. So it's everything around accessibility and the right to accessible places, spaces, and being those access needs, not being seen as a burden, but being welcomed and respected and acknowledged. And this has huge implications in education settings.
Exactly. Just as Shelley Moore said, she says, we should always plan for the margins because there is no average student. So we need to create accessible learning materials, practices, strategic, and that create flexible learning environments, which is what Dr. Kali teaches at the university, using the universal design of learning. UDL, multiple means of representation, multiple means of engagement, and multiple means of expression. All access needs of students with disabilities should be respected, welcomed, and accommodated, meaning that there's that collective access. Once one student is given access in the classroom, everybody learns from that design or that resource within that space.
And then the 10th and final principle is collective liberation.
Yeah, so the collective liberation unites individuals across diverse abilities, races, genders, classes, sexual orientations, no matter who you are or what you are. Like you can see, Kali and I, at the beginning, I described myself as being Black, African descent, and Kali described herself as white. And both of us had some form of disability or other. So the collective liberation means uniting people from diverse backgrounds within the same space and appreciating past liberation efforts while recognizing that this is an ongoing thing. It doesn't stop now. It doesn't end after this call. We still need to look at future endeavors and then change enacted by the collective action of disabled individuals with varied backgrounds and lived experiences. The voices of people with disabilities really matters and their background as we talk about collective liberation. And this has big educational implications as well.
Yeah, and to me, one of the biggest implications for schools and would be around this idea that all of us need to realize that there's ongoing greater need for inclusion, that we have, it's not a tick box, we're not done yet. So this challenges educators, families, policymakers, disabled people, and activists to constantly critique our school system and ask themselves, like, who is still being left out? Who is still not here? In our curriculum and the strategies we use and how we plan extracurricular, etc. And that actually goes for everyone. The great question under collective liberation is, in every space and place you go in your life, who is left out? And that kind of brings us to the end here. So why would we apply a disability justice framework? And to me, that's because the disability rights framework, we're not far enough. We still have ongoing battles. And so we want to have all people that are disabled be part of the movement. So that's the first reason for me. And so that connection between ableism and all the other forms of oppression, they all root back in eugenics. They all stem from that belief. And so we're lifting the boat for all.
And so we cannot have disability justice without collective access or accessibility in all our community. And as Kali said earlier on, in all spaces and places you go, look around you and ask who is not here, who is not in your classroom, who is not in your office, who is not in your community, who is not represented in every space. And how is it that everyone can get into the space that you're in without feeling left out, without being on a wheelchair and looking at the stairs and saying, hey, I struggle to get to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to put those links in the chat to the things that we said, like there's the Stella Young TED Talk, the Disability Justice Timeline, and then the 10 Principles of Disability Justice from Sins Invalid. So those 3 links I just put for you in the chat. And please take a look at that timeline. We're always trying to add things, and let us know if there's something you think we really need to put in there. And thank you so much for coming and learning with us today.
Thank you.
And so in the chat, there's people saying thank you.
Thank
You could
you.
pop a question in there for us if you have a burning one right now. But don't feel any pressure to do that.
Thank you. An excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
Nice
you.
to meet you, Maureen.
Nice to meet you, Carly.
Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you. Nice to meet you too.
Thank
Joann.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maureen.
Well, you did a great job.
Thank
Very
you.
good presentation. A lot of effort went into that.
Thank you. We know it's a big topic, so we were trying to give like a solid overview without getting too many slides.
No, it was very good. Complete and succinct. Excellent, I thought.
Thank you.
Good job. I'll leave now, but thanks again. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, that was a really nice presentation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tessa.
Yeah, so this will be on our YouTube channel, so anybody can watch it later also.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, we need to share the link on our social media and in our classes, Joann.
exactly. Yeah.
I can give you the link if you don't have it.
Oh, so in the chat, someone wrote, I would like to know how to join any movement here as I'm new here. Yeah, this is one of the difficult parts. It's like, where do you go? But you're already off to a great start with Connectra because they are part of this movement. And so all of the events that they offer too, that is building the disability justice community. And then a lot of the things that I do have come from going to things like that. So Noella, you're on a great path to finding where you can give the most to the movement and the unique talents and abilities that you have.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi. Thank you for your presentations. It's a lot for me to. The quote from Martin Luther King Jr. Injustice anywhere is a threat everywhere. I haven't yet. This is. I feel left out. My dad died, and now the public trustee guardian is managing my finances, and I've been refused to see my my dental cleaning bill because they pay that for me from the bank or something like that, and then I cannot see my boiler fixing. I just want to know how much that is. So you see, I don't know, it's difficult for me to I don't, yeah, to how do I deal with that when I've because my public trustee but anyway said that that it would he doesn't give it out because it would distress me. But the more I don't know, if they're doing the job for me, I just want to know how much is that being paid and how much it is, and then I can let that go. Do you understand the where I'm coming from.
Yes, that's a hard situation to be in, and I'm really, really sorry that that's happening to you. And it does feel like it's not following that line Joann said about nothing about us without us, because your voice should be at the center of the things and the decisions made in your life, right?
Yes,
So
I'd
that
like to be included. I'm listening to you. I mean, you're telling me that, but I feel, I just, it just disempower me. It just
yeah.
makes me like my voice doesn't matter. Like you know, if you buy groceries, it's nice to see a receipt, and then you can let it go, and you can focus on other things in life. So, but then, you know, yeah, so, when I've been told that no need to worry, but I can't see anything of my finances. So that's why I'm just, you know, I'm just, it doesn't sit well with me.
Well, and you're pointing out one of those things that we could put right in our timeline about like the rights of people with disabilities to know what is happening in all aspects of their life, right? No decisions made without you. So you're pointing out that ongoing struggle that we still have, and that should not be happening to you or anyone, right?
Yes, so, yes. So there's nothing, that's how I feel too. I it's, yeah, it's, hmm. I haven't yet again, just you know, to ask, you know, how do I know if you're paying the right amount, or for my dental bill or something like that? And I thought, if it's the name public trustee guardian, then do you think I should not worry about that, and just let them, you know, if they say no need to worry, then I'll just, you know, say, oh, okay, thanks for doing a good job, but I don't see the evidence, or, you know, the things that it just it's just the facts or something of that.
Yeah, well, I think you can always ask them for, like you said, like the evidence of that. Thank you. And I'd like to see the paperwork. That's within your the right to do. So if I were you, it sounds like that's what you feel most comfortable with too, is knowing. So you should ask that. You should say, you should demand that. That's what I would suggest.
I need to hear that. Thank you. And then I'll email again, just saying that I have the entitlement, as people tell me, the legal right or something. You know,
Yeah.
it sounds so big. Just to email me, because the other person says, "Oh, it's so easy." You know, they can just email the copy of your dental cleaning
Mhm.
bill or something of that.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Carly.
Thank you for
Um,
sharing, Sheena.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Will I get this information on the email? Dr. Joann Anokwuru. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. And also Dr. Christensen. Is there a print? I mean, just an information about this?
We
Or
can put our emails in the chat for you. How about that? I'll put mine in and Joann will type hers in. And then
yes,
you
I'm
have
new
our
and
emails.
all right. Okay. Right. I will. I'm new to using this Zoom, so I just have to click, you know, the 10 principles. But thank you for your email address. I'll just write that down fast. UBC. So do you teach at UBC, Carly?
Yes. I teach at UBC, and Joann also teaches classes at UBC, but she also works in a school. So she has both hats on at the same time.
I see.
So she's with a high school, and then also works with me and teaches classes with me at UBC.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. That's very educational. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for sharing this. And before we, now, let's see now. Maybe I should click. Maybe I should click the disability right and justice. If I click that on my Zoom, will you disappear? Because I'm new at this. So if I click that, then it'll be on my computer.
No, we won't disappear until you leave the Zoom meeting. But so if you click on the link, it will take you to that link though.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
what I did. Okay. Oh, sorry. So, oh, shoot. Okay, I have to go back now. Then I go back. Oh no. Oh, shoot. Oh, there. Okay, I just clicked the minus sign because the Zoom disappeared. So I'll click the disability rights, and then just I'm trying to be as fast as possible, so I'll have it. Okay, on my computer, go fast, and then I go minus. You have that, and then I have 10 principle. Thank you for your patience. Okay, and then I go minus. Then I think yeah, let me see, did I miss real fast? Okay, I've got the TED Talk, Disability Rights and 10 Principles. I think that's all, and then I can be more informed about it. Thank you for
Awesome.
being patient with me. I have a disability. There's a lot to absorb. It's just thank you, and continue on doing just educating us. Thank you for just being you and helping. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Sheena. Yeah.
Thank you, Joann and Carly and Casa. So I guess well, here you can see what I look like too. Well, let me see now. Hi. There. So have a good day. Thank you. Okay.
While I have a question,
And I'll leave.
just a hand.
I'll leave now. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
I have a question. Yeah, I saw the link, like I said in the chat, I'm new here in Canada and I'm disabled. So I would like to join. If you should recommend me any movement or organization of people with disability, because I would like to join the movement and also to bring my contribution, my experience and my contribution about disabled staff. And I would like maybe if you have some organization to recommend me. I saw on Corsa, Disability Foundation, I tried to open this website, but it doesn't work. It's an error when I open it. Is this an organization, or I would like to know?
Well, I think that anything Connectra does, so like the group that you're with right now, and all of those events that Custer played at the beginning in that video, so like the yoga in a chair, the planting group, all of those groups, that's where I'd start if I were you, to build your community and, like, as you'd say, like join the movement here where you're living. So I'd start with them, and then once you meet people, then they'll have more suggestions and you'll make some friends, and then it might be obvious that you want to do something else because they tell you about it. So I'd start with Connectra. That would be my advice. What about you, Joann?
Yeah, that's what I would advise. Start with Connectra. I mean, if you go to their website on YouTube and online, there's so many resources there. Noella, and from there, by the time you connect, because I always tell people that resources are also human beings like you. Because by the time you connect with one organization like Connectra and you get to meet people, they will also refer you to other things they do. So I think that's the best, like Kalia's just giving you the best advice. So why don't you start with them, Connectra, and with people there? You definitely would meet people, you definitely would meet resources, you will hear about some other events that happen regularly. And hey, you never know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All the events are on the webpage, so you can join all of them if you like.
Come on again.
Yeah.
I will.
So what part of Canada are you at, Noella?
I'm in BC.
Oh, you're in BC. Okay.
BC, yeah.
So, yeah. Is that it? Yeah.
Well, it was a pleasure. And
Thank
thank
you.
you so much. And thank you for the awesome tech support.
Yeah.
And I'll look forward to seeing this on YouTube on the Connectra's YouTube channel later.
It's there already. It's there
They're
already.
already. Oh yeah, because it's live. It's
It's
live.
live. Yeah, I tell you.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's
it's live. Yeah. Thank you, Kosa. Thank
Okay, thank
you.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you for this
Kosa.
opportunity,
Nice
Kali.
day.
Yeah.